So what is a right culture? Now,
Mm.
culture is very subjective, right? It's very subjective. It's about my experience with the organization.
Mhm.
But how does an organization build the right culture? And the answer to this question is by defining what are the values which are non negotiable in the organization.
Welcome to the All in Recruitment podcast by Manatal, where we explore best practices, learnings, and trends with leaders in the recruitment space. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channels on YouTube and Spotify to stay tuned for our weekly episodes. My name is Lydia, and joining us this week is Rohan Lele, Chief People Officer at HLE Glascoat Limited and Yash Group. Good evening, Rohan. Good to have you with us today.
Well, good evening, Teja. So good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Finally, we made it. Huh?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
So tell us, Ron, a little bit about your background. It's extensive, I know, and what's kept you in this talent space?
I think to me, HR as a profession happened by choice. I always wanted to be an HR
Oh,
professional, So,
really? What was
and
the
it's
driver behind that?
yeah. So I think when I started my graduation was into BBA in
Uh-huh.
general management. It was a general management program, and during my BBA, I got exposure to HR, and I also did my internship with one of the organizations in HR,
Mhm.
and that kind of stayed with me, and I was really, really keen to be an HR professional. So I was very clear that if whatever I do further has to be in the HR space. And then I decided to do my master's in human resource management. And since then, it's been 19 years in the industry now.
19 very important years. We've seen so many technological shifts and even changes in the kinds of
Oh, yes. Oh,
roles
yes.
that you
Oh,
see
yes.
in talent acquisition, right?
Absolutely. Let me tell you, when I started off in college, I still
Mhm.
remember, we used to use those transparencies
Yes, yeah,
we put on
projectors,
those
overhead projectors.
projectors, and from there, what we see now is a sea change with the help of technology.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like very long ago this
Oh yes,
time, right?
oh
And
yes,
we've
oh yes.
we've also seen how much and how short the intervals have become. So in your current role,
Yeah,
Rohan, what are some areas that you have prioritized in terms of the company's people strategy?
yeah. So I think what we are working is, on ensuring a great employee experience for our people.
Hmm.
I think a few years back the world was talking about employee engagement, but I think today we have moved beyond engagement, and now the world is talking about experience. So even if somebody tomorrow decides to leave my organization and join another company, what kind of an experience is he carrying in his heart? Is he becoming a goodwill ambassador for my organization? I think experience stays with people, positive experiences and negative experiences. And the way we have, one single point agenda is to ensure that we are able to give a great employee experience. So whether it is our talent acquisition, when we're looking at talent outside in the market, or whether it is learning and development, whether it's performance management, whether it is career progression, whether it's providing a certain set of facilities to our employees, the focus is on how can we enhance their experience. There's a data to prove this, that when the experiences that people have are positive, the engagement is very, very high with the organization.
So the engagement becomes a subset of the experience then.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So in terms of employee retention, you would also look, in industries such as engineering and manufacturing, for instance, what goes into a successful strategy for employee retention?
I think, there's no one way or one medicine to this problem
Mm.
of employee turnover. And I think it starts from, first of all, hiring great leaders in the organization, or ensuring that your leaders are able to inculcate the right kind of behaviors. And I am reminded of a statement by one of the CEOs, and he said that employees do not leave companies, they leave their bosses. So your leaders and how they carry themselves in the organization play a very, very important role when it comes to retaining good talent in the company. And hence, it is very important that when you're recruiting leaders, especially, you know, you not only check in terms of their technical competencies or functional competencies, but you also see whether there'll be a culture fit in my organization. You might come across a great talent, but will that talent be a culture fit in my context? That's very important. Because if that individual is not a culture fit, if he feels out of space, people who are working with him as a part of his team or her team, they will feel very uncomfortable. So I think that's one area that you really need to fix, and which is ensuring that you do a great job when it comes to hiring the right leaders in the organization. Look at their technical competencies, but also look at their culture fit. Very important. Second, I think people want to work for a cause which is beyond money. While money does motivate, but as an organization, if you can create a larger purpose and there's a sense of fulfillment that, oh, I'm working for an organization. For example, I'm working for an organization which is focusing on sustainability. I'm working on an organization, which is focusing on the larger good of the society. I work for an organization which has decided that we will not get into a business which in any way impacts the environment. Now, that's what people want to work for. There's an innate feeling that while I want to make good money, I want to make a great career, I want a great designation, but I also want to work for an organization which stands for larger good. So if you can sort of define and create that purpose and attach your employees to that purpose, I think people want to work for you. So that's another way
Hmm.
where you know you tell your employees what your vision and purpose is and make sure that they feel that they're a part of that vision, they're a part of that purpose. And that's what creates a sense of emotional attachment, a sense of engagement,
Engagement, yes.
yeah, with the employees. That's very important. Third is, everybody today thinks of, there's one question: what is in it for me? So is the organization really taking care of my capability development? How is the organization investing in my future? Is it wanting to invest in developing, helping me develop new skills, develop new competencies? So I think that's capability development is another area that organizations must focus on. Yeah. And the fourth, which is very important, that while you do all of this, how
Hmm.
are you creating a feeling in the employee that you are a valued resource? How are you creating that feeling that you're a valued resource? And that happens when you recognize them, when you reward them for their contributions and don't take them for granted. So I think when you
Hmm.
work on these four elements, I think that's where you'll be able to retain good talent in the organization.
These four elements, these are very strong fundamental elements that build a people strategy, definitely. Does this in any way change, or is it fundamentally the same from one sector to another? So let's say it's engineering or manufacturing, chemicals industry versus software or any other kinds of service industries, for instance.
So, well, the fundamentals really remain the same. Yeah. What changes is the business context and the kind of talent that you hire.
Hmm.
Yeah. And maybe the culture overall. But I think the fundamentals, so every employee wants to work for a great leader, a leader who's an inspiration, a leader from whom he or she can learn a lot of things. Yeah. Every employee wants to work for an organization which represents a larger good for the society, or which is standing for a cause. Every employee has that innate desire to learn, to develop, and wants to work for an organization where he or she sees a career. And every employee wants to be recognized, for good work done. So I think these are things which remain fundamental, irrespective of whether you work in an IT organization or an ITES organization or a manufacturing organization. The business context does change. So your practices. So just to give an example, uh, maybe the kind of your learning strategy or your talent
Hmm.
acquisition strategy for an IT organization cannot be the same as a manufacturing organization, because the businesses are different, the context is different. But should you hire the right leaders in the organization? If you ask that question, I think that remains the same.
So in this aspect, in terms of scaling a company or maintaining cultural drives or kind of employee engagement, as you mentioned earlier, would this fall into one of the ways that you can future-proof your people strategies?
I believe this, that there's nothing like future proof.
Mm.
And I'll tell you why. Because, in this VUCA world that we are living, the last 15 years, the kind of changes that we have seen the world over, and the pace at which the changes have happened.
The intervals, definitely,
Yeah,
yes.
and the pace at with the changes that have happened is unprecedented. It is so dynamic that you just can't build a future proof strategy. You will have to be on your toes, and you will have to keep on calibrating your strategy every few months, every few years. You can't say that, okay, this is my strategy, I am done, I am not going to look at this now for the next 5 years. And there's a beautiful example of how things change overnight. Suddenly, a COVID happened. India went through a lockdown. Nobody knew what to do. And how do I run my business? So you have to be prepared to take up challenges which will be completely unforeseen. So, can there be a future proof strategy?
Hmm.
Maybe not. But what is important is you understand what could be the challenges coming your way, and you keep on future proofing it. So it's a
Hmm.
dynamic process. You keep on calibrating your strategy. Maybe 15 years back or 20 years back, if this question would have been posed, I would have said, define a strategy, forget for 10 years. Because the world wasn't changing at the speed that it is changing today. But the whole context is very different today.
And in terms of strategy, operationalizing that is another aspect altogether. And so you've got a changing strategy, then you've got your processes and moving into collaboration with different departments as well, and maintaining that kind of open lines of communication with different departments. And that becomes very critical in executing a successful strategy. So how do
Yeah.
you maybe ensure effective or some sort of alignment, a clear alignment with these different stakeholders in a company so that you can execute the strategy where you need to?
That's a wonderful question, and that reminds me of a quote
Mhm.
by Peter Drucker. He said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And I have been a big fan of this quote, and I firmly believe in this. And I'll tell you why. The greatest organizations have failed. Those which were number one at one point of time have today ceased to exist. And one of the fundamental reasons is, while they may have had a great strategy, somewhere the execution wasn't great. And when it comes to execution, I think your culture becomes very, very important, very, very fundamental. And if you have a great strategy but a bad culture, you're doomed. You're definite to fail. Because if you want to execute, I think your leaders really living up to those values, living up to those behaviors, and ensuring that everything gets executed in the most effective manner
Mhm.
is very, very important. And I think it's the culture that drives execution of a strategy. And a lot of organizations, unfortunately, do not place the same or equal amount of importance on building the right culture as much as they put on strategy.
It's interesting. When you talked about employee experience earlier and then culture, I'm wondering which one forms the other. Is it culture that forms the employee experience, or is it the employee experience that eventually builds the culture?
I think the way we, so what is a right culture? Now,
Mm.
culture is very subjective, right? It's very subjective. It's about my experience with the organization.
Mhm.
But how does an organization build the right culture? And the answer to this question is by defining what are the values which are non-negotiable in the organization. So have you defined what are the values that you stand for as a company? And defining values is not good enough. You would have seen, when you get into organizations, there are these nice displays and posters around values. But how does an organization ensure that these values are inculcated and these values are lived every day? Not many organizations are able to do that. And that happens when there is a very solid commitment from the top leadership team that these are the values which are non negotiables and we will not compromise. And when the leaders live these values, let's say, for example, if ownership is a value, or collaboration is a value, or agility is a value, or integrity is a value, and as a leader, if I do not live those values, I will never be able to create a great culture in the organization. So culture is shaped by the values and the way people live those values. If you don't live those values, you create a bad culture.
Hmm. And these leaders obviously have to not only demonstrate these values, but also perhaps verbalize them as in at every opportunity that they can get at work, just so
Oh,
that it,
yes. So, one is how you demonstrate those values personally, but then I always believe that leaders have an additional responsibility of not only living those values, but ensuring that every team member who is a part of his team also inculcates and live these values.
hmm,
It's like I'll give you a parallel example. When you're a parent, right? There are certain behaviors that you do, right? That this is not you
yeah.
shouldn't do this or you should do this.
Yes,
But you
yes.
also ensure that you pass on the same legacy, the same principles, the same values to your child. As a parent, you do that, right? So if I have to draw a metaphorical comparison to an organization, a leader should become a parent and ensure that his team also lives and breathes the same values that he is breathing in the organization.
Hmm.
And that's what creates a great culture.
That leads into sustainable behaviors and the sustainable culture eventually.
Absolutely.
And behind that, or as the structural enforcement to this culture is data, as we see today, right? How data is used to inform your hiring decisions, to inform the knowledge that you have on employee engagement, etc. So, are there any examples that you perhaps like to share on how you've used data to inform hiring decisions and even improve the overall recruitment or talent acquisition process?
Oh, I think data is the most important.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one of the CEOs of an Indian conglomerate, I remember the gentleman saying that data is the new oil. So I think data is the most important when it comes to decision making. And we have seen how some of the organizations have gone to become phenomenally successful in the market space
Mm-hmm.
just by ensuring that you tap the right data. And so if you're able to make sense out of the data, that makes your decision making far more precise, far more objective, and the chances of your success increase multifold. Or rather, I would say the chances of your failure
Mm.
reduce to almost zero. So while you know I so there are a lot of leaders who are intuition driven naturally. There are some people who are intuition driven, and nothing wrong in that. So I think there's nothing wrong in being intuition driven or being very intuitive as a leader. But I fundamentally believe that in today's organizations, if you just purely go by intuition and if you ignore data, you could end up messing up your strategy. So while your intuition is important, because intuition comes from a lot of experience, wisdom, your failures, your successes, and that's great. But data cannot be ignored today. And that's where, like for example, if I talk about recruitment, we are trying to develop an entire dashboard
Mm-hmm.
around our talent acquisition, and
A
trying to see.
proprietary dashboard you own.
Yeah, we're trying to develop a
Yeah,
dashboard,
right.
which gives us all the relevant data as to what is going right, what is not going right,
Mm.
where can we improve, are we taking too much time to close out on a position, how can we re-strategize, what needs to be done. So I think data is fundamental today to taking decisions. Till a few years back, if you talk about data to HR people, they would say, "Oh, what's data?" I mean, it was very intuitively driven, feeling driven. Yeah, how employees are feeling. But today, it's gone beyond feelings. It's gone beyond intuition. Today, majority of your people decisions are based on data. Nowadays you have these chatbots, yeah, AI chatbots,
Yes, AI
uh,
chatbot taken
uh,
over everything else.
taken over everything else. And
Yes.
when a new employee joins, so some organizations have even implemented that.
Mm.
When the new employee joins, there's a chatbot that tells you, "Hey, how are you? Welcome on board. How are you feeling today?" And that chatbot continues to interact with you at regular intervals, and it keeps a tap on your mood in the organization to an extent that AI can even throw up a report that out of the 100 people that I have spoken with, these are the 15 people who are most likely to leave the organization. So it proactively sort of gives you a heads up that look, these are the 15 people who might leave, and you
Hmm.
need to do something about it. So data is that crucial. I mean, 10, 15 years back, I couldn't have imagined a predictive analysis of attrition. But today it's a reality. So I think whether HR or even the other fields, I think we need to embrace technology. Not embracing technology is not a choice anymore. Because if you won't, you are there to fail. So embracing technology, ensuring that you have the right data on your table and you're able to make sense out of the data and then act upon the data.
Hmm.
That's again very important. You may create the best dashboards. You may have all the data, but if you don't act on that data, it doesn't help.
And that data, the availability of this data and the different points that are, available to a person in a people team, or even a leader in the people team, or a leader in the talent acquisition team, for instance, right? They're then allowed more time to focus on other things. And therefore, that also makes their skill sets evolve. So how, in your point of view or your experience using data and seeing the technologies that have changed, how would you describe the role of a talent acquisition partner in today's context? And what kind of skill or what kind of acumen does a talent acquisition specialist need to have?
I think first and fundamental, what I believe is that any professional, you need to look at your role.
Mhm.
And what you need to look at is, are the things that I'm doing today, which are not value adding, which are important as a part of the process, but are not value adding. Can I outsource them or can I use technology to do that job for me? The moment I start thinking in that direction, I am left with more time to do quality work, value added work, So let's say, for example, I want certain reports or I want certain data, and I sit on my computer 3 hours every day, wasting my time to prepare something. Now, how can AI help me in getting the same data in minutes?
Hmm.
How can I use technology, or is there something that maybe I don't need to do? I can outsource that to someone else. So that's something that we need to ask, that how can I be more effective and more efficient? And the best way is to either outsource or let the technology take up certain tasks which are repetitive in nature and which are not value adding.
Hmm.
And then you get all the time in the world to focus your energies on something that is more strategic and something that is more value adding. And in that context, I believe, particularly in the reference to talent acquisition, AI is a great boon. I mean, I remember about 15, 20 years back, and this, IT organizations and banking organizations who hire people in thousands every year. Imagine how much amount of time it must be taking to screen profiles of candidates. There was a whole team within talent acquisition which would sit and only screen resumes. Today, AI and technology is doing it for you in minutes, not in days. So I think embracing technology and uh, is a great thing. I was talking to one of my friends in banking, and he said that they're looking at technology to have an interview process which is completely without any human interaction. No human interaction.
Hmm.
Imagine, I mean, where the world is really moving to, an interview process which doesn't have any human interaction.
At, at the most, I think we've seen also it evolving to assessment based, and at least the first two levels of interviews where they go through a questionnaire, for example, and then they go through an assessment, and then after that there's a screening. Then you've got the short list. Then you move on to a person in which at least they have these kinds of skills, and you'll be able to target the kinds of questions that you want and find
Yeah,
out more and probe. And
yeah.
in that sense, yeah, definitely AI has definitely uh, pushed the boundaries a little bit more for anyone in the field and forced them to maybe develop different skills as well. In
And
terms,
not just AI, but even like there are assessments which are available which give you a holistic view of someone's personality and whether that individual will fit the kind of job role that you are looking for. So there are very advanced level psychometric tools, psychometric
yeah.
assessments which are available. And if you use all of that, There's so much data that is available on hand to decide whether I should go ahead with this talent or whether I should not.
And the recognition of that data, the speed at which you use it, or the frequency at which you decide to use it, and when you decide to change your tactics or your overall strategy is going to be key as well. Looking at the speed at which things are going, the competitive landscape we're seeing in the candidate side, and especially for technology and even all the traditional sectors as well. What advice would you give someone starting out in talent acquisition today?
I think it is not just talent acquisition, but it is an advice for all young professionals beyond TA also.
Mhm.
I think one, it is very important to understand the business, what kind of a business your organization is in. Because depending on the business, the challenges are different. And because the challenges are different, the context is different. For example, when I look at an engineering business and a chemical business, the business challenges and the context is very different. And everything that we do, our actions have to be contextual. So, just because you've seen something great happening in an organization, you try and cut, copy, paste it in your organization. It doesn't work like that, because your context will be very different than the context of the other organization. So it's very important that you understand the business, you work with your stakeholders very closely, and you must be hands on. Don't try to be a manager from day one. Be hands on. The more you are closer to the business, the better you understand what are their requirements and what are their challenges. And when you are hands on, you are in a better position to offer them great solutions. And you will be respected as a professional, irrespective of whether you are an HR professional or whatever, is when you are able to offer great solutions to people. So understand the business, understand the context, work very closely with your stakeholders. Yeah. And most importantly, keep the fire of learning on. Like, I'll give you my personal example. I have decided it for myself that every year I am going to take up one new thing to learn.
What
So,
was it this year?
this year I've taken up a certification in coaching,
Mm.
and I'm also taken up a certification in one of the oldest psychometric tools. So these are two things that I'm working right now. Next year I want to do something more. So it's very important
Mm.
for you as a professional to keep on evolving. Those days are gone when you started with a job, you work for 30 years doing the same job, and then you retired. Today, with the advent of technology and AI, if you don't work upon yourself and if you don't keep on evolving, you will be irrelevant to the market in the next few years. So I think that's my piece of advice to all the professionals.
Absolutely timely and brilliant advice, because as we see today, not just businesses are affected, even people's entire roles have changed or have just completely gone, right? So definitely valuable advice. So thank you so much for your time and your insights, Rohan. I'm sure the audience at some point will want to connect with you and pick up on a conversation or a point that you've shared today. So where can they find you? Would LinkedIn be the place?
So either I can be found on Instagram.
Mhm.
So my ID is Rohan Lele Official, or you can find me on Gmail. My email ID is rohan.lele@gmail.com.
Thank you very much, Rohan, and wish you a great evening ahead. And we have been in conversation with Rohan Lele, Chief People Officer at HLE Glascoat Limited and Yash Group. Thank you for joining us this week, and stay tuned for more weekly episodes from All in Recruitment.